Welcome to our webcast on the economics of hardware as a service, or as we like to call it in the industry, HaaS, hardware as a service. I've got a special guest to help us navigate this topic, Anin Basu, who is the CFO of F12.net. Anin, welcome.
Thank you, Devon.
Excellent. And then I'm going to do a little bit of a job just to frame who you are, so those who haven't had the fortune of meeting you understand why I'm bringing you to the discussion. So you're the CFO of F12.net, and we do a lot of hardware as a service. It's one of the things we're known for. So that should, give everybody a clue that you know a little bit about the topic. But you're also the VP of Finance for Optiva. I think you were involved in like global acquisitions and integrations. You were a partner at KPMG with technology, media, and telecom, I think was kind of the space you were in there. You got a CPA, among other credentials, and a Bachelor of Commerce. Did I get most of that right?
You got all of that right, Devon. Thank you.
Excellent. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. And I'll just explain to the audience a little bit about my experience with hardware as a service. I've been in the IT business the gray beard will show you, for over 20 years, and ran a business that supported other organizations in the Calgary area. And we had heard about hardware as a service in about the late part of the 2000s, 2006, 2007. And we encountered this company that was known for doing it. They were kind of first in the marketplace providing hardware as a service. And that's what became F12.net. So my company joined F12.net. I've been around for a while. I've talked from a sales perspective about hardware as a service versus rental and buy for quite some time. But I wanted to get more of a financial angle in, because an observation I've had over the years of talking about this is CFOs often love it, and CEOs sometimes are a little bit more skeptical. In fact, I looked in almost all, not all, but almost all of the accounting firms that we support opt for hardware as a service in one form or another. And so I thought, well, let's figure out why that is, because folks in your industry, I believe, understand finance and math. I should hope so, or, God help us,
absolutely.
Nobody does. So I'm going to throw the question right off to you. Why is it? What is it about an as-a-service model for something that's physical like hardware? Why would that be attractive to financially minded folks?
Devon, if you think about the time you launched this product way back in 2008, 2007, think about the financial climate at the time. We had one of the biggest financial disasters in 2008. The markets were very turbulent. And we as finance folks, we always look for stability. And stability not only in the market, stability in our operations, predictability in what our costs are going to be. One thing that keeps fluctuating, which we hope doesn't fluctuate, are revenues. We don't have full control over that, but we do have control over our costs. And a product like HaaS does give us that visibility. We know that we have a finite number of assets and how much we are going to spend on that for a term. And if that variable is taken out of the equation and made fixed, it becomes that much more easier to manage the business, manage the profitability, manage what goes into the bottom line, manage bank covenants, and we'll get into these topics. But on the whole, what is attractive is that without spending the capital upfront, precious cash getting locked up in a bunch of assets that always depreciate, we are able to smoothen it over, the term of the arrangement, generally 3 years. And that gives us a lot of flexibility to do other things with that capital.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this is great, because these are, and we're not going to do a puff piece. We want to explore both the pros and cons, because I think sometimes it fits different businesses, and sometimes there's challenges or nuances to consider in selecting whether hardware as a service makes sense. I think it'd be good at this point to back up a little bit and explain what it is, because some of the things you talked about, like cash flow and all the rest, could be served by a lease. So how is it from a finance perspective that hardware as a service is different from just getting a purchase of your assets through a traditional lease?
That's a great question. Definitely, the cash flow issue can be solved by a lease. But when you're running a business, uh, there are other resources that are required to attend to those assets and keep them operating at a level that you need to run your business. The service part of HaaS is a very critical component one cannot ignore.
Hmm.
When you are having resources who attend to your assets, keep them up and running, remember, you have to pay them benefits. You have to make sure that you are keeping up with their pay scale, salary changes over 3 years. So while your asset lease is fixed for 3 years, the service part of it is not fixed for 3 years. That varies. And in our HaaS program, what you have managed to do is fix both sides, not only the asset, cash flow associated with the asset, but also the cash flow associated with the service to keep it up and running, to attend to maintenance calls. You don't have to worry about having a couple of your guys go out and make sure that if the asset is not working, you have to call the manufacturer, get it fixed. Sometimes you have to ship it. Sometimes you have to replace it at a very short notice. So these are some variable costs that are not taken care of when you have a lease of your asset and you are getting a capital lease treatment.
It's a good point. And, the nuances of leases, because when we first started this out, in many ways, it was a capital lease hidden up as a service. I'm talking about the early days, like 15 years ago. And the challenge we encountered when we were doing these leases, you're still getting an asset. So your lease is this serial number. If that serial number fails, I just can't take it away and swap it like you can with an as a service. If I'm getting a rental of a car and the car doesn't work, I just get another car. I'm not worried about that, VIN number. Like Ford doesn't have to come out and fix that rental car while I wait. That's the effect of a rental. But the other aspect is when you try to do add-ons, they then increment the monthly cost. They start charging you even more in order to make them, either they extend the term or they blend the costs up. So it becomes a little bit inflexible or sometimes really expensive, especially in the last 12 months of your lease. And they're very happy to add it on and extend it, but your costs get kind of skewed, as you're trying to influence the flexibility. But I guess a big difference is with the capital lease, you own the equipment at the end, which is very different from an as a service where you don't. What is that? What's the financial effect of not owning the equipment, not having? I think I've heard of the term. If you don't have the risk of the equipment, if you don't own the equipment, it becomes more of an Opex versus a Capex. Help those of us who don't have a commerce degree appreciate what does that mean for a business?
The fact that when you own an asset, you have the risks and rewards of ownership, as they say, and that basically means the asset is sitting on your balance sheet. And when you're calculating your returns that you've earned in the year, various metrics that you're looking at, one of the metrics you would look at is what is the return on the invested assets, return on assets invested, and that can vary by industry. But if you don't have the asset on the balance sheet, when you are, for example, running it on an operating lease or you have a hardware as a service, that asset doesn't get capitalized on your balance sheet. The return, therefore, looks better because the denominator doesn't include a bunch of assets that are used in generating that return in your business. And from a capital lease perspective, the other benefit is, like, if it is a capital lease, I don't think there is very much tax benefit. It's like whatever you pay your lease installments goes as a tax deduction. But if you have outright bought the asset, then the asset gets capitalized on your balance sheet and you get a tax depreciation, which goes as a tax benefit in your tax return. It can be more advantageous that way. But if you have hardware as a service or HaaS, then the Opex, that's the amount that you pay to rent the asset and have the support associated with it, is a tax deductible expense as well. So
100%, just like any other business expense, right?
yeah, dollar for
Yeah.
dollar.
Yeah.
So there could be the tax benefit that you derive from HaaS, dollar for dollar, extends over the full 3 years, the full value of the contract as you pay it. On the other hand, if you have an asset that you bought and it's capitalized on your balance sheet, the tax depreciation tends to be higher in the first year, little lower in the next year, and further lower in the third year till
I
it's
see.
completely gone.
Okay, so just to translate that into practical dollars, I got $100,000 in cash, and I buy $100,000 of computers. My balance sheet gets to show that I traded $100,000 of cash for $100,000 of computers. But as we know, computers depreciate almost as fast as bananas. They go gray real quick, or brown, I guess. Bananas go brown, right?
Yes.
Only problem is you can't make banana muffins out of, old computers. Anyway, I'm stretching this analogy to death. So now you've traded your money. You don't have that $100,000 in cash, but you don't get to claim $100,000 of expense when you purchase that against your taxes in year one, right?
No.
Actually, you don't have $100,000, but effectively you still got to pay tax on whatever wasn't depreciated on that year. Am I speaking about
Yes.
right? Okay.
So typically, assuming the depreciation rate is 33%, and I haven't checked that, but say it is 33%.
Okay.
So 100,000 times 33% is $33,000. That's how much you would claim in your first year as tax depreciation. But
so you got to get the rest in future years. So you're kind of deferring your tax.
The
benefit.
remaining 67 is over the next 2 years.
So I guess the advantage then is, let's say it's dollars for donuts the same, and your hardware as a service was $33,000 in year one. You only spent $33,000, so you still have the other 66,000. Yeah, 67. Okay, 60. I mean, it would be 66.66, but anyway, $67,000. You still have that in cash to use for other things. You spent 33, but you get to that 33 goes off is an operating expense and has a tax impact in the year in which you've. Okay, that makes sense. So you got the cash flow and you got the tax advantage. Excellent. Help me understand, and I've had this explained a few times, so I'm going to ask you to use real simple language, like the cost of capital. So, and it's been explained to me today that businesses have a cost of capital, and $100,000 spent today has a different value than $33,000 spent over 3 years.
Yes.
How does that work, and how do economically smart people think about this?
Well, I think it's not so much cost of capital. It's really the time value of money.
Time value of money. Okay.
Right. So it's a very basic and simple principle that $1 in your pocket today is more valuable than $1 someone promises you 3 years down the line.
Okay.
Because
I can follow that logic. Yeah.
That dollar 3 years down the line is of less value to you today.
I've been noticing that a lot lately when I'm trying to buy anything. Yes.
Exactly. So on that same principle, the cash that you would invest in your assets today would generate a higher return than if someone were to say that I'll give you the cash 3 years down the line, and then you own the return on that at a later point in time. So that's why if there is a better use of cash and better allocation of cash to generate a higher return than investing it in tangible assets or computer equipment, in this example, then yes, we would divert that cash to that higher use so that it can earn a higher return than spreading it over 3 years.
So this makes sense of there's an axiom. Our boss, Alex Webb, who first introduced me to this whole hardware as a service idea, as I mentioned those years ago, he used to say, listen, if you've got a bunch of cash and nothing else to do with it, by all means, nothing better to do with it, by all means, buy computers outright. But if you can use that cash for better advantage, like, so you're not tapping your operating line, you're not, or whatever. One thing I know is in some years, I think there's 100% depreciation on getting some manufacturing equipment, an incentive by the government to,
Correct.
so it just might be better to allocate your capital to areas where it can have a better effect than computers, possibly.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. So the capital that is available to businesses is always a finite number. It's never limitless. And how you allocate that capital to earn your return is are choices that are available to businesses. Some businesses would say that you would have heard, you've seen in the public markets, for example. So
Okay.
sometimes businesses buy back their own shares.
Yes.
Now, what could they not have used that money to buy assets instead to grow their business? But those businesses have realized that maybe there is the return that we will get or the value of our enterprise that we will have instead of investing in assets but just returning the money to the shareholders is probably better. So
Well,
these
it's a good
are
bet if you count on your stock going up in value over time, because
correct.
cash won't. So yeah, okay.
So businesses have to make these decisions based on what they believe is the best use of their available capital. And in this decision, bringing it back down to a buy versus rent is a very valid consideration. That sometimes, like, two businesses don't, the environment of two businesses will be very different. They may be in the same geography, but one will be taking a decision that it's better for us to outright buy our assets.
Mm-hmm.
Some businesses will say it's better for us to rent, because that cash we will save by renting the assets and spreading out the payments is probably can be used in a more productive manner,
I think
whatever
this is a really
that may be.
important point, and especially as we move from a world that, at least for the last decade or so, capital hasn't been as difficult to come by, but the cost of capital is increasing. So that
Correct.
consideration made that the calculus may be changing for businesses. And I want to get into where it's not, like, where businesses should really think before going into an as a service model for their hardware. Before we go on to that, you had mentioned about, businesses only have so much capital capacity, and they have to, choose where to allocate it for the best effect. Like that makes sense. What's the impact on credit capacity? Because I know personally I get only so much credit. Like, there's a limit at which the bank will say, Devon, no, Ferrari, that's not going to happen. So there's a limit. And how is the capital treatment, or is there a difference in the credit treatment between as a service or a capital lease?
That's a great question. I think uh, we all know that our credit capacity is determined by our earnings. How much do we earn? How much profits we make in a year,
Mm-hmm.
EBITDA, for example, and how leveraged is our balance sheet already? Like, how much have we borrowed already? If we have no borrowings and we are making good earnings, we are a candidate for a sufficiently high credit limit. Shouldn't have problems in getting a loan from a bank. Um, so when you choose to incur an Opex like HaaS, obviously it eats into your earnings.
Because it's an
The
expense of that
It's an
year. It's
expense,
not, yeah, yeah.
correct? It's an expense. You are considerably getting because you're investing in productive assets. You're earning revenue, but at the same time, this is an operating expense. It reduces the EBITDA as a result. But what it doesn't do is add leverage on your balance sheet. On the other hand, say you have a capital lease.
Can I just go back to that? Can you decode it doesn't have leverage on your balance sheet? What does that mean?
That means that you haven't borrowed money to incur this operating expense.
Oh, I see. So you're not showing a
A liability.
Yeah, I see. Oh, gotcha. A liability for.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
But when you are trying to replace a HaaS arrangement with a capital lease, for example, then what happens is uh, you have a asset on your balance sheet and you have a capital lease obligation on your balance sheet, but the lease rentals you pay is not included in your operating expense. It goes as interest and depreciation. It goes below the EBITDA line. So on the face of it, you may seem to have got a lift on your earnings, which you think that
I'm
you
looking
have
at my
got.
monthly P&L. I don't have this HaaS expense. I'm happy.
Correct.
There's a but I feel like coming.
Correct. And the only caveat there is, while the leverage ratios may show like an improvement, but then when you add back the capital lease obligation to your debt balances to calculate your covenants, you may not be better off. This is again depending on the size of your balance sheet, how much debt you already have. So one has to be careful in deciding whether to uh, do a HaaS transaction or a capital lease transaction, um, because one may not be better off one way or the other, depending on how the covenants go with the
Depending on
banks.
how leveraged your organization is, depending on whether you're up against your covenants. And just for those who may not be familiar with that term, what do you mean when you say like covenants? What are we referring to there?
So, well, when banks give you loans, they tie you down to some financial ratios that you got to meet on a trailing 12-month basis. And and you wouldn't want to go offside on that, because the white hats that you are dealing with in the bank very quickly get their black hats involved. and
I see.
and
The good cowboy, the bad cowboy, or good cop, bad cop comes. I see. Gotcha.
and
Yeah,
and then the cost of borrowing increases as a result.
I see.
It is, or worse, they may want their money back. So that is, something that you have to obviously keep an eye on. Um, and I don't think that choosing between HaaS or capital lease is should be that choice should be made based on bank or bank covenants. I think this one
Interesting.
is a real business decision that has to fit into the overall strategy of the business, like right down to the basics of how much cash do we have and where do we deploy this cash, and do we need to increase resources, human resources, to run our platform or our assets that we use to generate revenue. Um, the first decision is that, are we able to generate revenue with the finite resources we have, and how best can we do that? Then comes the other aspects of it, that once you have decided that, okay, how do we finance it?
Right. Okay. So this was really good. And I think to this point in the conversation, we've talked about HaaS in general, hardware as a service. F12 isn't the only provider of hardware as a service. It's taken off. I mean, software as a service, as everyone knows, is the thing everywhere. And hardware as a service has, I think, benefited from that momentum and that understanding of businesses. And heck, if there's anything that depreciates faster than hardware, it's software. So that also makes sense, right? So most software anyway. But I thought it might be good to talk a little bit about the peculiar economic benefits of the F12 version of hardware as a service, something we call device as a service, desktops, laptops, monitors, keyboards, and all that sort of stuff. And these can be a little different than what you might see in other words. And I think they should factor into your decision about whether this program makes economic sense or is a good business case, as you were just framing, Anin. One is buying power. So I know we go out and we buy like high quality equipment, business grade equipment, and we talk to the manufacturers and pre-negotiate a good price from the manufacturer. So we'll talk to Dell, HP, Lenovo, and look at them. So you get a bit of a buying power you don't get if you're just buying a few hundred, right? We're buying a few thousand. And that provides inflation protection in that we're setting a price for the term for that asset. Of course, if you buy it or up front, there's no inflation, but the next device you might add on, so let's say you start with 50 laptops, you can add your 51st laptop 12 months later. You get to add that for the same monthly price as you started the program with. That's, I think, unique. It's certainly not the way a typical lease would work, I would think. And then, right, you'd be buying it whatever the value is of the day and adding that into your lease. Yeah.
That is correct. That
Yeah. So
so this one is like this program, and this is where I find it very unique. It's because it's allowing us to plan for future growth at prices that are fixed today. That's a very interesting arrangement.
yeah, I don't know that it's done anywhere else. I haven't talked to every hardware as a service provider, but being able to add on at the same price and not extend the term. So that's the other part. You effectively won't be paying for any of those add-ons. Great for businesses that are growing, but the converse is true if a business is shrinking. Just, I don't think this is unique to hardware, because I don't know if you buy an asset, if you lease it, or if you get it as a service, you have the asset. You can't just reduce the account without some financial consequence, selling it off
Correct.
or something. So yeah, so maybe that doesn't factor in as much as possible. The other unique one is the step up privileges. So you can take a laptop and trade it in, sorry, a desktop and trade it in for a laptop, or a lower grade laptop and trade it in for a higher grade laptop. And again, I don't believe, I know that's not possible in a lease, and I don't believe that's possible in most other hardware as a service platforms. And the final one that I don't think gets factored as much is end of life costs. So if you do the program and you're in it and you're at your refresh renewal, there's two ends to it. There's the deployment of the asset, which F12 includes the labor. So that's, anywhere from a couple of hundred to a few $100, depending on the complexity of the devices being deployed and the needs of the customer. Then there's those end of life costs. Taking it back, recycling it. We sometimes provide them to charity for a discount, wiping off the data. All that sort of stuff is, somebody's got to do that. There's time involved in that, and it doesn't often get factored into the total cost calculus for a piece of equipment all too often. So I just wanted to highlight those because they're peculiar economic considerations for the F12 device as a service, as we call it, our hardware as a service implementation. All right. It might be good then to talk a little bit about some of the other considerations that I think are, just with the last few minutes, that are important when you consider hardware as a service or device as a service, why organizations sometimes choose to do them. One is standardization. So it's been my experience that organizations find it really, really difficult to have consistency amongst their hardware, especially as they're buying over time. So everybody's got different monitors and different devices, and they're at different ages. There's not a fixed life cycle. So having an as a service program commits you to a life cycle. And heck, it's just nice to be able to have the same laptop docks across the office, so everybody's got the same thing, and it's smooth, and there's an aesthetic appeal to having an office with all the same equipment and the same monitors. So,
and collaboration is easier as well.
Collaboration, that's true. Also, there's a how was it put to me once by a customer who's passionate about it? There's a cultural impact of everybody having the same thing. There's no excuses or emotional response because Anin's got the new laptop because you're the CFO, and I can't do my job because I got Anin's 5-year-old one that got handed down to me. So there's a bit of an impact there, which may or may not fit in there. And I know our techs love it because we don't have to deal with the manufacturer warranty. We have spares on hand in our warehouse to rapidly replace a device, even if we're not sure if it's the hardware. It's like, yeah, it could be the hardware. Let's get a new one in. We can take that back, not bother the customer, and get the issue resolved. I said a non-economic, but there is an economic impact to that, because if you were to try to do the same experience in your organization, you have to buy extras. You always have to have extra laptops and extra desktops and extra keyboards and monitors sitting around.
That's capital locked up.
Yeah, it's locked to capital. I guess in our program, we're doing that for our customers by having them warehoused, which provides a bit of a business continuity advantage. If there's flood, fire, loss of device, again, there's something available for you to get you back up and running while we work through the warranty claim, etc. And the last one I'll mention that is become a lot more of a consideration lately is the ESG side of it. So you've got a device, It's end of life. These devices, yes, they're getting tired. Yes, the productivity loss of your employee doesn't justify, or more than the productivity advantages of replacing the asset more than justifies the cost of the asset, right? Wages are way higher than the cost of an asset, and if you don't want to slow down your people, generally speaking. But that doesn't mean that we want to throw that device and all of those rare minerals onto the garbage heap. Instead, we get them recycled, repurposed. We work with a number of organizations to make sure that they have a second life, which is wonderful because you know new computers all the time sure add up. There's piles of them in some countries. So I just wanted to highlight those are sort of the extra economic considerations when considering whether device as a service fits for you. So that concludes our conversation. And then thank you very much for helping to explore this topic and lending your Bachelor's of Commerce degree for the last half an hour. I won't claim that I'm an expert, but I'm certainly more informed, and I hope our audience is as well, for having this conversation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.